IBA letter to IOC June 2023, boxer's DNA was that of a male consisting of XY chromosomes. So this whole story really blew up this week. There are two boxers, female boxers, who, according to the IBA, the boxing association that had jurisdiction before the IOC took it away from them, they claim they ran tests showing that they have XY chromosomes. So that would make them at best intersex. So some people are denying it. The IOC is denying it, but we'll get into it. The athlete who has ignited a worldwide controversy in Olympic women's boxing was disqualified from the 2023 International Boxing Association World Championships in New Delhi after two tests, one in India amid that tournament and a prior test in Turkey in May 2022. Quote, concluded the boxer's DNA was that of a male consisting of XY chromosomes, according to correspondence the IBA sent in June 2023, more than a year ago, to the International Olympic Committee. The June 5th, 2023 letter spotlighting Algeria's Imane Khalif reads, quote, this situation epitomizes the importance of protecting safe sport and the integrity of sport in which the Olympic movement is jointly committed to. Three Wire Sports has seen the letter and the test. Now, if you've been following this, that's an important point because a lot of people are trying to claim nobody has seen these tests. These tests don't exist. This outlet is saying they have seen the tests. And so presumably, and they're saying they saw the letter that was sent to the Olympics a year ago. So the IOC is trying to claim they don't know anything about it. They never heard about it. They haven't seen these tests. But apparently these tests exist, at least according to this outlet, and I have no reason to doubt it. So right there, I err on the side that yes, what the IBA is claiming is probably true. If it wasn't, why are they lying about having received these tests? So I'm going to cover the rest of the segment from that perspective. They are not trans, but they have a genetic disorder. The documents shed new light on the controversy enveloping Khalif and as well Yu Ting Lin of Chinese Taipei that has erupted at these Paris 2024 games.
I'm sorry, Russell. I might be incorrect. Is Chinese Taipei in the Olympics? Is that Taiwan?
You know what? I don't know.
I think Chinese Taipei is Taiwan.
We've got
the smartest audience, the best audience.
We have the smartest audience. What do you say, audience? Is that Taiwan? Is it Taiwan? You keep an eye. You let me know. On Thursday, just 46 seconds into a preliminary round fight in the women's under 66 kilogram class, after Khalif's second right hand hit her in the nose, Italy's Angela Carini quit, saying it hurt too much. That triggered the worldwide furor. Khalif, in Saturday afternoon's quarterfinals, defeated Hungary's Anna Luca Homori, ensuring the drama will persist. Now through to the semifinals, Khalif is assured of an Olympic medal. Khalif fights next on Tuesday night against Thailand's Janjem Sawanpang. On Friday, in the women's under 57 category, Lin defeated Satora Turdebekova of Uzbekistan in the prelims. She is due to fight Bulgaria's Svetlana Kamenova Sunday in the quarters. The controversy, which has seen the likes of Donald Trump, J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and untold numbers more on social media, spotlights one of the most challenging issues confronting international sports. Whose rights matter more, the individual athlete or the collective? In boxing, it's all the more challenging because unlike, say, track and field, the potential for one athlete to get seriously hurt in competition is all the more real. Since 2009, when the track athlete Caster Semenya burst onto the scene, This matter has sparked emotionally laden arguments on both sides. This was somebody else who had XY chromosomes, but this was in track. The challenge is perhaps most acute, involving athletes with what is called DSD, individuals with differences of sex development. DSD is an umbrella term for a group of conditions where someone's chromosomes or hormones don't fit the usual expectations of being male or female. Some say the individual athlete's rights matter most. Others insist there is a more vital collective right for female athletes to have female only sport to be free from discrimination. All right, so we'll litigate that a little bit. But just to take a look at some of the reaction, and this is what I meant. Well, not this in particular, but we'll take a look at some of the tweets. Everyone has just been awful in different ways. This is very interesting. The International Boxing Association is awarding Italy's Angela Carini with $50,000 in prize money after she got defeated by a fighter with XY chromosomes. Now, the IBA is the body that did the tests, finding that these athletes had XY chromosomes. Now, there is a little bit of Russia versus the West going on here. This is part of why they're trolling the Olympics like this by giving this person the prize money that theoretically they deserved, at least according to the IBA. J.K. Rowling. So listen, I have generally agreed with what she has had to say about these issues, but like a lot of people, they're really showing that they are everything people accuse them of being in the way that they are reacting to this. You're not talking about trans men infiltrating the women's category. You're talking about people who were born women who have a genetic disorder. Now, that is something that can be debated, and we will discuss it and the ramifications of that and how do you handle something like that. But to attack them in this way is really disgusting, and it really undermines their credibility on an issue that I have always, for as long as the show, I've always been passionate about. And it's very unfortunate to me when these people just really show their asses this way, because it really just invalidates everything else they have to say. So here's Rowling on August 1st saying, acknowledging that the person has DSD. Someone with a DSD cannot help the way they were born, but they can choose not to cheat. They can choose not to take medals from women. They can choose not to cause injuries. Okay, so she's acknowledging that she knows this person has a genetic disorder, that they're not trans. The very next day, the idea that those objecting to a male punching a female in the name of sport are objecting because they believe Khalif to be trans is a joke. We object because we saw a male punching a female. No, you didn't. No, you didn't, because the person has DSD, which you admitted the day before. So why go out of your way to use this kind of language? And you know what the person says here, you're giving it some validity, because what she's responding to, this person here says Amain Khalif should sue every single account and outlet saying she is trans. Obviously, I don't agree with that, but assholes are putting her life at risk. It is illegal in her country to be trans. The continuance of the blatant trans lie continues unfettered on Twitter. You know what? You're making this person look good with your argument, because you're kind of reinforcing the point. Why? Yes, it is dangerous in that country to be trans. Why do you continue to call this person a male when the day before you acknowledged that it's more complicated than that? And wokeness, classy, keeping it classy. For the second day in a row, a biological man won women's boxing at the Olympics. Yeah, it's more complicated than that. And Riley Gaines, who, again, I mean, I've done segments about her getting attacked at I don't think it was Berkeley. It was a college in San Francisco, though, getting attacked and held hostage. I've always felt that she's on the right side of women's sports, but she's gone completely off the beam. She's another one. As if the satanic display at the opening ceremony wasn't enough, the Olympics glorifies men punching women in the face with the intent of knocking them unconscious. Amain Khalif is one of 2 male boxers fighting women at the Olympics. A woman is going to die. Yeah, they're not male. They're not male. It's more complicated than that. So on the other side here, a couple of little input from the libs. Accusations that Algeria's boxer Amain Khalif is a man should be banned from women's sport highlights the intrinsic sexism of women's sport. Even if Khalif has male XY chromosomes as is considered on that basis to be a man, her exclusion would be discriminatory. So this is the other side of the crazy. This is the other side of it.
Yeah.
And hey,
and I can see that because that only has 1 like. So, you had to search far and wide.
well,
that engagement is off the charts at 246 views.
Well, you know what? I think Elon is suppressing a lot of that because the libs have been going crazy with this, but on X, it's kind of hard to find. It's like way down in the algorithm on X. But this is very typical of the kinds of arguments that I've been seeing. And I think that does these women a disservice because you can much more easily make the argument that somebody who was born and raised a female should be able to compete. Then you should not be using it as a backdoor way to try to argue that, well, of course, everyone who identifies as a woman, which most people don't agree with, should be able to compete. But they're trying to use it to push that broader agenda, which I think if you really cared about these 2 boxers, you wouldn't do that. You would deal with this.
I'm going to be honest. I have a lot of questions. I'm just going to wait till the segment's over.
All right. So this is pretty typical of the kind of arguments you'll see from libs. When I was in middle school, I learned there were only 2 genders. When I did my bachelor's in biology, I learned that there are also people who are intersex and the importance of the SRY gene. When I completed my master's in neurosciences, I learned that sex is already hard to define and gender is both social and in the brain, and that everything is a lot more complex. When people say it's basic biology, they're telling you they haven't moved past middle school. All right, so pretty much everything in that is completely fucking wrong. But it is very typical of the liberal line on all of this. Sex is a spectrum. It's complicated. None of this is actually based in any kind of science. So this article I would recommend if you want to take a look at this. Reality's Last Stand. The author Colin Wright has his PhD in evolutionary biology. Jake, can you take down the DueDissidence thing? Thanks. The sex binary refers to the biological reality that there are only 2 sexes, male and female, and that these categories refer to individuals whose primary sex organs are organized around the production of either sperm, male, or ova, female. The sex binary does not entail that every human is unambiguously either male or female, even though the vast majority are. This is an important distinction because adopting the second framing is inaccurate and plays into the hands of activists who seek to debunk the existence of only 2 sexes by calling attention to the existence of rare edge cases, i.e. intersex conditions. But the first framing, there are only 2 sexes, is both biologically accurate and ensures that 2 distinct concepts, transgenderism and intersex, remain distinct. It also puts to rest the false notion that the existence of rare edge cases necessarily entails that sex is a spectrum and that we are all therefore intersex to some degree. This is really the argument that you see from gender ideologues. The idea that because there are intersex people, it's like saying, look, some people are born with claw hands. That doesn't mean fingers exist on a spectrum. That doesn't mean humans are not a 10-figured species, because you have these very rare cases. And even in those cases, on a chromosomal level, they are male or female. There is no third sex that produces something other than ova or other than sperm or produces both. There is no such thing. There are two sexes. Variations in secondary sex characteristics like testosterone production does not invalidate the entire class of male female. That's like saying variations in height invalidate the category of male female. You're talking about a bell curve where most people are going to congregate around the middle. Yeah, sure. I'm shorter than a lot of women. That doesn't
saying
make
all
me
people
not
that have
male.
Curly hair are female and all people with straight hair are male.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so to continue. In recent years with World Aquatics First, there have emerged guidelines among some number of international sports federations that say athletes with DSD who go through male puberty ought to be restricted from high-level female competition. In boxing, this matter is all the more fraught because of a complex political dispute between the IOC and the IBA. You're going to like this next part, Tusker. In some, the IOC decided it simply does not like the Russian head of the IBA, Umar Kremlev, who is close to top Russian leadership. The IOC may say many other things, but that is the essence of the situation. And the IOC on June 22nd, 2023, withdrew recognition from the IBA, banishing it to the Olympic wilderness. I have a little more on that later from another article. On Friday, at the daily IOC news conference, spokesman Mark Adams had this to say, referring to IBA testing at the 2023 New Delhi tournament. What we see, quote, what we see now is that some want to own the definition of who is a woman. And there I can only invite them to come up with a scientific-based new definition of who is a woman, and how can somebody being born, raised, and competed and having a passport as a woman cannot be considered a woman. If they are coming up with something, we are ready to listen. We are ready to look into it, but we will not take part in a politically motivated, sometimes politically motivated culture war. And allow me to say that what is going on in this context in the social media with all this hate speech, with all this aggression and abuse and fueled by this agenda is totally unacceptable. When Bach says when Bach says the IOC is ready to listen and ready to look into it, the obvious question, what about the IBA letter sent in June 2023? The IOC's position is that the gender and age of the athletes are based on their passport. Okay. So if you look at, you don't even really have to read between the lines of what the representative of the IOC had to say. This is a backdoor way of allowing transgender people to compete in women's sports, because if you're just going to go by the passport, most Western countries allow you to change your sex. Right. So what kind of that's no standard at all. Now, we do have some video.
What's your insinuation? Is transgenderism the new doping?
What's whose insinuation?
No, I was making a joke. I was saying, like, what are you saying? It's a backdoor for the trans thing. Are you saying that becoming trans is the new Olympic doping? You know.
Well, some would say, but we actually look. The IOC has a point. We have some video of the test that the IBA ran in order to ascertain sex here, and it doesn't look entirely scientific to me.
Baby. Yeah. Come on. Why won't this wig come off?
So look, that's how they test in Russia.
Those Russians.
So I don't know how valid that test really was.
That's a holdover. That's actually a holdover from the USSR.
I heard that. I heard Stalin came up with that test.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Khrushchev banned it after 1953.
So look, they're bringing it back now. All right. So moving on. So Quillette actually had the best overall article on the issues raised by this that I saw. So they have a chart here showing that what you'll hear from a lot of people is a lot of women have high testosterone, and that is very, very misleading. When you're talking about women with high testosterone, it's high for a woman. It is not anything like the male category. So there's a chart of how men and women, boys and girls, pretty much have the same levels of testosterone until they're at about 11. And then you can see from that point, there's an enormous divergence. As anyone going back to that lib meme, anyone who's taken any basic biology would understand that. So this is Quillette. Female athletes with high T, including those with polycystic ovaries, have T levels towards the top of the female range, not outside of the female range or inside the male range. Their sex is not in doubt. High T in an athlete who seeks to compete in the female category is code in international sports for either doping with exogenous androgens or being biologically male with bioavailable endogenous androgens. There's no indication that either Khalif or Lynn is doping. So what that means is their genetic disorder is such that they have perhaps internal testes, as some intersex people do. Because if I'm understanding this correctly, you cannot have those levels of testosterone without testes generating them. As an aside, the reason many federations and the IOC itself for years used T as a proxy for sex is that it's an excellent one. Neither ovaries nor adrenal glands produce T in the male range. Only testes do. If you're looking for biological sex rather than legal gender, it's certainly more accurate than a passport. Now, here it gets a little more into the Russia thing. Olympic movement politics are a huge factor in this story in at least two ways. The first of these is the IOC's fight with the IBA. The IBA happens to be aligned with the Kremlin, which is separately hostile to the IOC for its stances on doping and the war in Ukraine. The second is the IOC's policy choice to align itself with trans rights advocates and against advocates for a sex-based female category. Here, the IOC is not just at odds with the IBA, but also with some of the Olympic movement's most important federations like World Athletics and World Aquatics. Unlike the IOC, these federations are determined to prioritize fairness and the preservation of the female category for female athletes. Now, this was the take that Quillette had, and it's pretty much my take. The female category in elite sport has no raison d'etre apart from the biological sex differences that lead to sex differences in performance and the gap between the top male and female athletes. The suggestion that we could choose to rationalize the category differently, for instance, on the basis of self-declared gender identity, or that we could make increasingly numerous exceptions in the interests of inclusion, as the IOC seems to have done to allow Khalif and Lynn to compete in Paris, has no legs outside of certain progressive enclaves. Second, any eligibility standard like the IOC's framework that denies or disregards sex-linked biology is necessarily category defeating. Finally, federations that are committed to the female category and to one-for-one equality for their female athletes must step up and do two things. They must craft evidence-based rules and then stick to them consistently. And they must seriously embrace other opportunities to welcome gender diversity within their sports. Yes, why have women's sports if everyone can play in them? That is why we have women's sports, because women, it's unfair to make them compete against men. They're going to lose all day and twice on Sunday. Why would you have women's sports?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I absolutely do agree with that take. I mean, if you have some type of like clear physical superiority, then no, it shouldn't be allowed. But my question is like, this lost me in a lot of different ways. I don't know what the definition of intersex means. I mean, there's so many things that go into this. This sounds like an entire different language to me. And that's kind of what I meant by like, I really don't understand what the controversy is. So then they say they're XY. Well, I thought XY meant male.
They have male.
Then,
they have a genetic disorder. They were born presumably with vaginas, but chromosomally they're male. They have male testosterone. They have male muscle development. They're not now in terms of the gametes, and that is what the Reality's Last Stand article was pointing out, and biologists that are not afraid to lose their careers in the West will continue to point out. There's no third sex in regards to gametes. You produce ova or you produce sperm.
Yeah.
But there are certain people who have sex characteristics of both sexes, in spite of the fact that ultimately on that level, they are going to default to one sex or the other. So given what the article is saying regarding testosterone, presumably they have testes. So
but that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, what is it that people are going on? Is it the XY chromosome? Because XX is female, XY is male.
The IBA concluded, and they had this already in their guidelines, that if you have XY chromosomes, male chromosomes, you are not eligible to compete in the women's category because of advantages that inherently gives you. Now, some people will say, why were they allowed to compete until then? Because they weren't doing that testing until then. They didn't do the testing. So that's
so what's
why
the argument against
that's
that
why
testing?
all of a sudden
why is that testing not inclusive?
I think what they're saying that there's an ideological conflict here where the IOC is really siding with trans activists and trying to, what can we conclude from a standard of whatever your passport says, other than that the IOC favors going on I identify as a woman standard for competition. Now, if you're going to have a standard like that, why have women's sports? Like it completely eliminates the purpose of it. Now, I think that's a non-starter, and it's a non-starter for most people. When you talk about a particular situation like this, which, as the Reality's Last Stand article points out, don't allow the activists to make these the same issue. It's not the same issue. It's two different issues.
I don't think it is.
These are not people who are born men who are competing as women. These are people who are born women with intersex characteristics, with male characteristics that give them a competitive advantage. So some of the arguments you'll hear from people is, well, but they were beaten by women. Okay, well, the Yankees get beaten all the time, but are you going to tell me that having a payroll that dwarfs other teams doesn't give them an unfair advantage overall? Why have they won so many World Series versus the Toronto team, right? Because they have this enormous payroll. Sport is complicated, man. Sure. And their tactics and everything. Sure, they're going to lose sometimes. They made it to the Olympics, didn't they? So clearly they're winning a lot more than they're losing. And the argument is, well, this does confer a certain advantage. Now, the most reasonable counter argument is, well, what about Michael Phelps? Michael Phelps had certain genetic abnormalities that made him such an effective swimmer. I was talking to Keem before. I'm not sure if this is true, but he didn't build up the what do you call it in the muscles? The
lactic acid.
Lactic acid, exactly. He didn't build it up like another person would, so he had certain mutations. So do you disqualify him? I think that's an interesting place to go, but I would counter with this. Okay, so what if you had somebody who wanted to compete as a marksman that had a genetic disorder where they had, bionic eyes? They had like telescopic eyes. Would that be fair for that person to compete as a marksman? Would we allow it? Particularly now, even if you want to have this argument in regards to track and other types of competitions, when you're talking about combat sports, that shouldn't be a hard one, right? I mean, because someone could die there. And people who want to direct the attention towards, well, these people trained all their lives. Well, so did the people they're fighting. Not everybody gets to be everything. If you want to be a basketball player and you wind up my height, not that I ever did want to be a basketball player, but if I did, I wouldn't get to play. Would that mean they have to let me on a basketball team because it's my dream? I wanted to play basketball. Not everyone gets to do everything. That's the way it is. It sucks. In order to keep that category, particularly when you're talking about combat sports, in order to keep it safe.
I just feel like I have yet to hear any argument from any side of the ideology that is either like activist pro-trans or activist anti-trans. I have yet to hear of any sensible type of like middle ground or someone really wanting to find a solution to it. I mean, I know we kind of bandy it about and we talk about it every now and then, but it's just like, I just learned like 15 different genders tonight. I mean, so like I'm already behind, like, and I don't know what we're like. It's so difficult to understand what we're arguing against. It seemed like whenever we had this whole entire issue about like, okay, can we at least agree that like people that have transitioned after male puberty, it's kind of unfair. It kind of almost felt like everyone was sort of on that same page. Like everyone had kind of gotten to that point where they go, okay, well,
well, that's why these issues should not be the same issue. They're
but
not
now
we're
talking, now we've boiled it down to chromosomes. Now we got to like take skin splices and examine you under a microscope before we allow you to punch somebody. And to me, it's just like, it's a sport. Is there any way to just start doing weight class or, we got plenty of ways to measure things. How hard can people hit? And then you put them up against.
No, that's really not workable because if you've gone through male puberty, even if you're the same weight as the woman, you're going to be much stronger.
Well, yeah, then do those dumb things that like the science channels used to do, where they punch like gel torsos and figure out how hard you punch and put same punching class.
I really don't think it's complicated. I think the IBA standard under which they were disqualified is correct. It sucks. You want to not put your child in that position, have them tested young before they dedicate their lives to that sport, because you want to make this argument in other areas. And honestly, I wouldn't agree with it in other areas either, but you can make this argument much more in track than you can in combat sports. I think combat sports, that's just common sense. If you have male chromosomes and there are, they always go to safetyism. Oh, these sex tests, we're going back to the old days. They used to be horrible. Well, in the old days, they didn't have genetic tests. Nobody's going to be putting their hands in anyone's junk. They'll take a blood test. And if it comes up, you have male chromosomes. Sorry, you can't compete in the women's category. Now, you want to say
I think that's fair.
They should give opportunities to people who don't neatly fit in these categories to compete in other areas, have open categories. I'm all for that. And you know what? When you poll people, most people are not, as to Keaton's point in his shit post, most people are not mean. Most people are actually for that if you ask them that. Like, do you agree with open categories? Most people are for it. But you ask them, do you think people who are biologically male should be competing against women? Overwhelmingly, they're going to say no. Now, this is complicated because they are intersex, but in the end, because of their chromosomes, they have certain advantages. Now, I just before we finish up, I want to make a point and I want to make a commitment. If you feel like this is, there are so many things happening in the world that should be focused on over this thing that got just incredible attention this week. The way I described it was a story like this was like every liberal has waited their entire life to virtue signal off this story. They could not wait to tell you how much they are for these boxers and their right to box. And the same thing with the right-wing dipshits. They could not be more horrible and abusive than they were, as I showed you in some tweets. But let's look at something that didn't get any attention. Let's look at something that didn't get any attention. This is Sakobi Marsalat of the Congo. She lost her fight and got emotional, then threw her hand across her mouth while pointing two fingers to her head. Sokobi made the gesture to signify that people are being killed in her country, but that no one is speaking out to stop it. Now, in a sane world, this would have been the talk of the week. This would have been what everyone was talking about, not this issue of intersex boxers. So my commitment is I am going to cover that story next Sunday. By the time I saw this, it was too late to cover it today. But I am making that commitment to the audience. We will cover that story in depth next Sunday.
Thank you, Russell. That's great.
With as much focus as I gave to this. That is my promise.
Yes.
Because I got to make up for this fucking story.
Please clap.